Now, before you can begin to have success in frosting your cake, you actually have to bake the cake. So here are 10 tips on how to bake a great cake. The first tip is to make sure that all of your ingredients are at room temperature. Now this is really important because as you're combining the ingredients together, you don't want temperatures such as cold eggs or cold butter to affect the quality or the end product of your cake. If all of your ingredients are at room temperature, you'll be able to mix the ingredients together properly, as well as have all of the leavening agents in the cake work together to create that perfect cake. Tip number 2 is to measure correctly. Honestly, a lot of people don't quite measure correctly. So if your cake has a tendency to not turn out correctly, well, maybe that's because you're not measuring very well. So you want to make sure that your ingredients, your dry ingredients, are nice and smooth on the top as you level them out, and make sure that when you measure those liquid ingredients that you get way down to eye level in order to see them well. This video is part of a Skillshare class that I have created on how to frost a cake. It is a thorough class that teaches everything you need to know to frost a perfect cake. So click the link below for a free access to Skillshare classes. Tip number 3 is to scrape the bowl. Now whether you're using a hand mixer, a standing mixer, or just mixing by hand, it's going to be really important to use a rubber scraper or a spatula to really scrape the bowl well so that all of your ingredients are incorporated into the batter. Tip number 4 is to mix just right. Now this means you don't want to overmix your batter and you don't want to undermix your batter. If you are overmixing or undermixing your batter, you might have clumps, or if it's overmixed, your ingredients might rise a bit too much, or your cake might become a little bit chewy. Tip number 5 is parchment paper. This is something that I swear by. So this is just a little parchment circle. You can cut them out very easily and place it in the bottom of your pan. Your cake will never stick to the pan again. And honestly, you don't even need to grease the sides of the pan because your cake will come out every single time with this parchment on the bottom. Tip number 6, don't open the oven. Some cakes can be a little finicky, especially German chocolate or red velvet. And if you open the oven a little bit too early, the cake might drop. And then you'll have to rebake the cake, which is definitely not something that we want to do. So try not to open the oven until the cake is almost done. Or you could open the oven halfway through, turn it, and then don't open the oven again until the cake is nearly done. Tip number 7, put your cake directly into the oven once you have it mixed. Once the ingredients have been mixed, the leavening agents start working together, creating little air bubbles within your cake. And if you wait maybe half an hour to an hour before you put your cake in the oven, well, those air bubbles will have already began to pop, and therefore your cake will not rise correctly. Tip number 8 is to poke your cake. Don't prick your cake. So basically, using a little toothpick to test if it's done? No. This can cause your cake to actually sink in the middle if you use a toothpick before the cake is done. So what I like to do is just use my finger and poke my cake. And if it springs back, then I know that the cake is done. If it doesn't spring back, then I know that I need to have my cake in the oven a little bit longer. Tip number 9 is to freeze the layers. This can be really helpful because it makes your cake a little bit sturdier. If you bake a cake, cool it, and then directly frost it, your cake will be much more fragile and more difficult to frost and decorate. Tip number 10 is to bake your cake early. Bake your cake a day before or 2 days before. Baking your cake actually on the day of can cause a lot of stress because it might not be cool enough when it's time to decorate your cake, and then your frosting is going to start to melt, which will cause a lot of problems. Now here's a bonus tip for all of you that are located at a high altitude. You want to make sure that you follow a recipe that aligns with a high altitude. So that might mean to decrease the sugar and increase maybe the water or the milk. You might also have to increase the flour a little bit or decrease the baking soda. If you are at a high altitude, use recipes that work really well for you. You might need to take a few recipes that you enjoy and kind of tweak them and play with them just a little bit until you get a cake that turns out really well. Now make sure that you follow these 10 tips for great cakes so that you can actually have a great cake so that you can frost and decorate a beautiful cake. Now remember to check out my Skillshare class. I know that you will love it and you will create amazing cake creations with the techniques I share with you.